Um, so I'm Brian Kardell. Here's the plan, what I want to talk about. First, I'm going to just really quickly sort of whip through the history of trying to get speech into the browser, like the history of some various attempts. And then we're going to have code samples and kind of a whirlwind walkthrough of a fairly high-level bit. And then we'll go back and dig into actual details with more code and stuff like that. And maybe that part we can have a little back and forth conversation. And then finally, what's next? We'll see when we get there, I guess. So just for some perspective, the web has been around about 26 years. It's hard to put a real birth date on it, but you know, it took a little while to get started. And so for it to really sort of come into its own and become a mainstream thing, like 96 by the time IE started to get really involved and everything. So just to give you some historical perspective, wow, that's 1997, guys. That's Microsoft Agent was a text-to-speech engine in Windows 95. You could embed in your IE browser text-to-speech. So 20 years ago, today minus 20 years, that was possible. So back then, like, a lot of people were thinking about speech on the web, like this is going to be a thing. In 1998, CSS2 defined oral status sheets. That's basically about how you speak the page. Again, that's today minus 19 years. Then today minus 18 years, a bunch of companies got together and created the Voice XML forum. And they handed that over to W3C in 2000, and a whole bunch more people got involved. That was about 18 years ago. W3C about that time was like on fire. I mean, it seemed like everything would be magic. Like they would give us the answers and just churn out the standards, and bam, 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 the world will get so good so fast. A lot of us thought, like, any day now, like the next release of my browser, we were going to have all the voice stuff. And indeed, in December 2000, we got the W3C speech interface framework, which was supposed to give us like voice XML, which was like HTML, but for voice. But instead, oh my God, so many XMLs. There was voice XML and natural language semantics XML and speech recognition grammar. It's almost like Oprah was giving away XMLs. You get an XML, and you get an XML, and you get an XML. None of these made it into the browser. So all of this is just history that's happened, right? It's not that those things weren't useful, but they didn't make it into the browser. So they're used in other things, right? A couple of people in this room. Standards are really slow. Like, you'd like to think that this is a unique case, but it's really not. About this time, there was this idea that maybe we were doing it wrong. And so this idea of community groups came about, and a working group is a really big formal thing in a standards organization. It has a lot to do with like IP policies and things like that. A community group is sort of a lesser version of that, and it's really easy for people like the people in this room to get involved and talk about it on a mailing list. And then hopefully the output of that should ultimately go to a working group for eventual standardization. And so after a decade of nothing happening, 7 years before today, there was a new community group started, sort of lesser than a working group, and it started with a post to the mailing list that said, some of us at Google have been working on extending HTML elements with speech. So what they really wanted to do was talk about it and get a lot of people's input and, you know, take some steps to get requirements and then move that into a working group. They got a lot more than they bargained for, because everybody who ever had read or done anything about speech seemed to want to talk about requirements and things. But a good thing that came out of that is that they actually got proposals. Now, they weren't in a working group, so they're not official proposals. But they're ideas, API designs, and documentation from Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, and Voxio. And they took these and they combined these into one sort of Uber specification. And those didn't move into a working group either. What did happen instead is we created another community group in 2012. And that one started with Google saying, hey, we're shipping something. It'll be a subset of this big Uber document. We're not quite sure what it will be, but we're going to ship something. 4 years ago, we created this thing called the Extensible Web Manifesto that said, hey, we've learned a lot about standards. We're kind of doing this wrong. And the reason that I mention this is because Google should not have been just releasing something, right? We did a lot of things sort of not well, and we said we should change that. But these APIs sort of beat us to the punch. They were released before that happened. So that's the backstory. Let's talk about where we are now. So this is the world present day. This is the text-to-speech part. It is in pretty much every browser. Opera Mini has really missing a lot of features because it doesn't. It does most of its rendering on the server side and just pretty much spits out really simple stuff for you. So anything really active isn't going to show up. IE is a zombie. It's gone. It's been replaced with Edge. And the Android browser is terrible, defunct thing that should burn. So it's really widely deployed. The speech recognition, the thing to listen to speech and give you back text, less so, but still it's almost 60% of deployed browsers, and Firefox also has it behind a flag, and Edge says that they're working on it. So the implementations are buggy and inconsistent. Bugs and further implementation is currently low priority. The APIs aren't super great, and nobody's working on addressing that because there is no standard or official draft, and none of us are really cranking out a lot of stuff that uses it. So it's just going to kind of continue in current mode unless somebody comes along and gives it a kick and gets it going somewhere. So that's kind of depressing. But there's good news, because the good news is that we have actually, like you saw, a lot of stuff is shipped. So it might be buggy, it might be inconsistent, it might not be actually what we would like to have, but it's a lot of raw materials. And with a lot of raw materials, we can actually make a lot of stuff work. So that Extensible Web Manifesto that I talked about talks about why you should ship low-level features first and let the community help you figure out what the higher-level things are. This is currently in a state that's a lot like the web itself around maybe 2000. Lots of stuff doesn't work. Lots of stuff was proprietary, very mixed, very buggy. But we did things like make jQuery and made it easy to develop. And then we took the lessons that we learned from sort of the fittest libraries out there, the ones that were really popular and survived, and we took those and brought them back into standards. So we have an opportunity to do that if we start using these. So that's sort of enough just talking. Let's actually look at some code and stuff. So there's a top-level object called speech synthesis, and curiously enough, it has a method called speak. The thing that you speak is called a speech synthesis utterance, and you create one of those by giving it some text that you want it to speak. So if I click this,
hello darkness, my old friend.
That was pretty easy, right? I mean, and it works everywhere. If this is your need, if this is all you need, you're golden. You can write this all over the place. For a lot of people, that's not enough. They want additional things. So some of the properties on the utterance are pitch, rate, and volume, which all default to 1, but for some reason I can't comprehend, all have different ranges. So pitch is from 0 to 2, rate is from 0.1 to 10, and volume is 0 to 1. If you think that's nutty, raise your hand. I think so. So if I run this, we should hear something that's lower, slower, and a little quieter than the last one.
Dude, setting pitch, rate, and volume is easy, but really weird.
So I agree. Pitch, rate, and volume only get you so far, though. There's all different aspects of expressiveness. One of them is voices, which we're going to save really the details of that for when we go in a little bit more because it's a little confusing. But examples here.
Hello. 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 Hello.
So these are all different voices. You couldn't achieve those effects with just toggling, those 3 levers that we had. You couldn't achieve actual voices. So voices is one thing. And then I have a question mark here because there's more to it than just a voice, pitch, rate, and volume. The voice XML people in the room will know. Bell Labs demonstrated digital voice synthesis for the first time at the World's Fair in 1939. 1939, can you imagine? That's crazy. I'm actually just going to play this for you because it's that amazing.
With no expression. Now say it in answer to these questions. Who saw you?
She saw me.
Whom did she see?
She saw me.
Did she see you or hear you?
She saw me.
So you can see, even with something as simple as a sentence, she saw me, there's all different kinds of things that go into natural sounding language that aren't way beyond just pitch, volume, and voice, right? So there's all kinds of subtle things. Speech at the end of the day is full of really hard problems. If you find any of this history stuff I talked about interesting, I wrote a whole piece. I'll share these slides at the end, and there's links to everything in here. The utterance also has a lang property, which is what is it called? BP 47, maybe? I don't know. I like to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but they're the normal language tags that you use every day, right? So ITUS, ENUS, and those affect how it's going to create the voice, how it's going to choose a voice to use, and also how it knows how to pronounce some words. So we can run this. It includes some Italian and some English. It's a scene from The Godfather.
Io so l'inglese. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Saturday.
So that's pretty cool. Utterance events have a on start, on end, and on error event. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating 2 speech utterances with some Led Zeppelin lyrics. And on the start of each one, I'm going to put their code down here, so what we'll get is something like captions. And then at the end, we're going to do the chorus because it's like the coolest hook ever.
We come from the land of the ice and snow, from the midnight sun where the hot springs flow.
And now you're all supposed to sing the no? Okay. Okay, so you have an utterance. It has pitch, rate, volume. You can have a voice that's attached to the utterance, and it has events, start and error. So everybody got their head around the basic concepts? Okay, so maybe not. So when you hear start, and when you look at the documentation, it tells you that it's started, right? To, I think, most actual human beings reading that, they would think that means some sound has started to emanate from the speakers. But that is actually not true. And when you call speak, you're not actually, it's not synchronous, right? It's asynchronous. So speech synthesis actually contains a cue. And you can pause the cue, you can resume the cue, and you can cancel the cue. And there are corresponding events for on paused, on resume, etc. And so the on start means that really it started processing, not that there's sound flowing out. So just a little gotcha there. So that's like the high level of speech. Now I can go into further details about text-to-speech, and I think that that's probably the way to go, and maybe we can save the speech-to-text for another day, unless anybody is like really antsy for that, or...
I'm down for speech to text.
Okay. All right, so let's do that. So these are all my blog articles. They contain a lot of very similar context, but they also include a lot of gotchas. So one of the things here is, you see, I can create an utterance, and I can set the pitch, and then I tell it to speak, right? But I just told you that there's a cue, right? And so I lay out some Neil Young lyrics here, and then I tell it, speak the first one, and then change its pitch. So what's going to happen, right? I mean, because it didn't speak it yet, or maybe it did. How do we know, right? And then the second one, I say, speak it, and then change the pitch. And the third one and the fourth one, speak them. And I'm doing some logging here that you could follow if you wanted to see that, so you could see that it pauses. The log happens, it pauses, nothing is spoken yet. So we're going to click here, and the pause will happen first. It will take a second or two to play. And we'll see what happens with those pitches, right? Because I told it to speak, and then I changed the pitch through the reference.
My ma, hey, rock and roll is here to stay. It's better to burn out than to fade away.
So that's really curious, right? So like one of them changed, but the other ones didn't. So the spec actually, the draft, I mean it's unofficial, so it's a draft, says that if you try to change the property while once it's been placed in the queue, that it should throw. No implementation does that. So don't think it will. What will happen is it will be unpredictable. So like when you hand something to speak, just assume that it is immutable. You should not change it, right?
So you would do like a stop at the end, and then you would start a new speak with your new tenor, and then you would stop that.
No, you can add things to the queue, right? But I'm saying you create individual utterances, and the utterances are the things that you place those properties on. You say, speak this utterance. Once you've created it and handed it to the thing and said, speak it, you could still have a reference to it. Don't mess with
You're
that.
committed at that juncture.
Well,
because the standard's not done.
The standard is unclear. What it says is not reality.
Okay.
And what is reality appears to be pretty consistent, but totally unpredictable, right? So here's some bad news. At the time of this writing, it would appear to me, I have no actual hard data to prove this, that the queue appears to be effectively shared across all sites. And so you can get things sort of backed up in your queue, and you can get your queue in a funky state, and then you can try your own examples, and suddenly they're not working, and you're like, why? It's because the queue is paused. So also, if you're on Chrome for Android, this probably didn't work at all, and in fact, none of it at this point, if you ran that example on Chrome on Android, would probably work. Okay, so then these are the events. We already looked at those. This one demonstrates actually the pausing and resuming. So you see it starts pause.
Maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate.
So you got to see that it was in a pause state initially. So the pause happened before the speak. So another thing is on Android, this example also won't work. Pause does not appear to work correctly on there. It also appears to be very easy to create situations where you don't get those callbacks at all. Just get the cue screwed up. There are a number of bugs that open with this about it losing references to your objects. So that's kind of terrible. Another thing is there's an on error event in case it tried to produce speech but wasn't unable to, which is a logical thing. The draft lists 11 kinds of problems that it could throw errors for. You might want to look at that and see. The draft also says that the error will have a dot error attribute, which should be an error indicating why. So here's another interesting thing about this. So you see, we're giving this some text, and it says, if I'm reading this to you as a human being, I would say 1 pi is about 3.14, right? So I didn't say 1 point or 1 dot. That's a pause, right? I say 1 pause. Pi is about 3. That's a point, right? In America, I would say we loaded the 4x4, not 4x4 or something, right? I might say meet me at 3:14 p.m. There's a whole bunch of ways I could write that. But how you pronounce these words and how you make sense of this, how you actually read it, it's not like a straightforward thing that you say, always when you see this, you always do this. So, you know, what we want to happen when we say this is for it to read like I would speak.
1 pi is about 3.14. 2. We loaded the 4x4. 3. Please meet me at 3:14 p.m. EST. 4. My birthday is February 17th, 1974.
I like the breaths.
Yeah.
The breath sound, that's cool.
So-
That's creepy.
So the interesting thing here is that like a whole bunch of those other approaches deal with being a lot more specific about this, and it's one of the reasons that a lot of people didn't like this approach. But actually, it does appear that all of them are very, very good at figuring out at this point how to say things contextually. But it's not bulletproof, it's not consistent, and it's very, very difficult for it to do the intonations on things like she saw me, right? The things that we saw demonstrated in 1938. It's very hard to do that automatically, and so there are a lot of things like voice XML, speech synthesis markup language. There's a whole bunch of things that came before that attempted to solve some of those problems. The spec says that you can give as your string to utterance a valid some kind of document. Depending on whether you're reading the spec or the errata or somebody's documentation on one of the implementations, it could be speech synthesis markup language or maybe something else. Those let you express all kinds of stuff about speech. That would be really cool if it worked. The proposal there was that it works actually just like HTML. In HTML, if you provide an element, a tag, and the browser doesn't understand that tag, it still just shows you the text inside. And that's how it's supposed to work. So you're supposed to have this XML that says, here's all these intricacies about pronunciation and inflection. But if you don't understand that, you just understand XML, you still get the text, and you're all good. So that's a beautiful compromise. It's like one of my favorite parts of HTML, and they're going to borrow that into the spec. So you would be able to give it a voice XML document or SSML document or whatever it was. It also completely doesn't work that way in practice. All of the implementations will actually read you the XML, which is probably the worst thing you could possibly do, right? It's going to say less than X question mark, that's terrible. If you set the lang to an invalid language tag, say Hobbit or Vulcan, it will simply use the default. I couldn't find that in the spec somewhere, but that seems to be the behavior. So I promise you we get to the voices thing, right? Okay, so get voices. There's a method called get voices. You have to get the list of voices supported by your particular speech synthesis by calling speech synthesis get voices. The bad news is that this page was loaded. I detected the length of this array and placed it here, which as you can see is 0, which means there are no voices. But that's clearly a bunch of bunk because I just showed you, I demonstrated voices to you, right? So the reason for this is because it's populated asynchronously. We have to wait for the voices changed event to ask for the list of voices. If I click here, we will wait, and 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 we can wait here until the cows come home, but that line is never going to come up. Why? Because we did wait for the voices changed, but we tried to wait for it after they're already loaded. So we missed it the first time, we missed it the second time. You have to get this just right, or you're not getting any voices. That's kind of terrible. So there are these speech synthesis voice objects that, assuming you can get the collection, then they're a true array, like a real array. It's like, unlike almost everything in the web, they made this one. It's array. You can use find. You can use, all the great methods. So here I'm going to look for a voice called Bubbles, and I'm going to sing some Jack Johnson lyrics. Which is kind of cool. So here's the trick. If I look at this on my Mac in Safari version 7, don't ask why, I get 60 voices, a list of 60 voices. If I look at it in Chrome version 60, I get 43 voices. If I look at it in Firefox Developer Edition, I get 24 voices. If you run this example on Chrome for Android, it will not sound like this. And what it will sound like is totally unpredictable. This voice doesn't exist on there. And there is no rhyme or reason or seems to be any sort of hard, fast, this is how you identify this voice, or here's how you choose from a set. Makes it very, very difficult if you want to have even a really basic thing like, I would like this speaker to sound like more male or more female, or I want something that sounds kind of robotic, or there's no good way to like query this or anything. Also, the documentation, you'll notice here, I chose this by its name. There's also a voice URI property. And if you go look at the documentation, it says that the property that you want to set on your utterance is the voice property. That actually works on Chrome desktop, but on Chrome Android it doesn't work. You need to set the voice URI, but it seems that doesn't work on Chrome desktop, so you just set them both and you should be happy. So these are all the warts and everything that are in there. Lots of incompatibilities and warts. So does anybody have any questions about the warts or, yeah?
Yeah, I'm wondering if these voices are packaged up as part of this browser software, so you're not going out and getting the voice, are you, when you're issuing these commands?
That is a great question. That is a really great question. So the spec says it can do either. So if you ever listen to, if you ever said, okay, Google, navigate home, and you're navigating home and you're going through some, remote thing, and suddenly the voice seems to change, it does appear that some of them are remote URIs and some of them are local URIs. So if chances are, if you want to get like the higher quality, it's probably remote, and then locally you'll have a smaller set that's probably not quite as intelligent. Yeah. So.
Do you know anything about whether it's possible to specify your own voice that's hosted somewhere in order to, to force it to be consistent?
So it should be, but it is not. But that's exactly the sort of thing that we want to talk about. Okay, so here are the things that are wrong with the current API. In my opinion, this just comes from me, like personally trying to use it for the last couple of months on some pet ideas. On the one hand, it's trying to be a really low-level API, right? But there it falls a little short because I want to be able to give you the ability to say, hey, here's somebody who supplies voice, and I just want you to carry that out. More than even that, like I want to be able to get the sound. It just automatically pipes to the speakers. Here's a thing from MDN that will show you. Okay, let's see. Is this working? Hello, hello?
Yeah.
It's not going to work for me.
So that's not piping into the speaker.
Yes, the demo gods are angry. Well, that's a shame. It might be because I have something else that's using the mic. So basically there is a whole low-level architecture for web audio that you can tap into the stream and do things with it. You can do frequency modulation and add effects like reverb and distortion and all sorts of cool stuff. If they just pipe it directly to my speaker, I can't do any of that, which is kind of a shame because if you give me access to the stream and let me twiddle with the actual sound, sort of my possibilities are endless. But if you only give me these three little primitive knobs, much less so, right? So I think it fails at being a low-level API. You can't easily specify where you would like to get your voices from. You kind of can, but like there's no guarantee that that's going to be respected. It's unspecified how that would be wired up, at least as far as I've seen. And as far as I can see, there's not a protocol in place for how that would work.
Have you tried doing that and been successful in any browser platform combination?
No, because so you just have get voices, right? And that gives you back actual voice instances. So far as I can tell, you can't create a voice and give it a voice URI and stuff, but that seems like, why shouldn't you be able to do that, right? Like it seems like you should have control over these ends. So at the low level idea, it kind of is not the API that I think ultimately would be the best thing. Part of the thing with the Extensible Web Manifesto says that there's a lot of magic in the browser, right? Like there's all kinds of things that are implemented the same and all over the place, and yet they're not specified anywhere, right? So you have things like CSS. It's this super, super high level thing. And you say, God, if I could just, like when we had rounded corners, God, if I could just round those corners, my life would be all set, right? There's no way to plug into that, to be like, just give me the rectangle that you're going to draw and let me paint the box around it, right? There's no way to do that. So with the Extensible Web Manifesto, that's taken a lot of things into standards, and There's like all these things to do the excavation down there and find how do all these things connect, right? So because this was born before that, obviously it doesn't have any of that stuff in place, but I believe that there is and should be an opportunity for us to go and figure out the plumbing here and describe it in terms of web audio and the fetch that's involved and what is the protocol, how do I get back a created voice. I also think that get voice is just really weird. Like, it's so easy to miss the moment where your voices are available, and it seems to be not entirely accurate everywhere. The other thing that's weird is that they can actually change, right? Because like you were saying, are they local or are they remote? If you're using a remote voice and suddenly you're traveling, that remote voice is no longer available, now what, right?
Can you set like a precedence? Can you say like use Frank's voice and
No.
then switch?
No, you cannot. But what they're thinking is that you'll just subscribe to this on Voices Changed, and anytime that changes, you'll refigure it out, and then somehow, I guess, make sure that that gets set on all your utterances. So like, it's too late once you put it in the queue. You can't choose a precedence or anything. So, but that is exactly what I mean. Like, that whole aspect of the design. Utterances that are, in theory, really should be immutable, but in practice aren't, and create lots of confusion and wonkiness, that you can't know what the voice is. I think that's a lot to ask the average author to work out in their head. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to work it out in my own head, and I still don't really know. It seems to me that since you can't speak without a voice, that like whatever logic you're going to use to choose the voice from should make itself available to the queue so that you can do exactly the sort of thing that you're talking about. Like, you can say, here's my chooser for voices, and I would like to go and, like, when you're ready to speak, then give me a list of voices, not some other time, right? And also, I think that basically you can kind of think about speak as an asynchronous service. And in fact, it's probably like how you think about your thing with voice XML, right? Like, you probably have a service, somebody calls that with voice XML, and it creates the speech.
We do it weird. Yeah.
Okay.
It's our parse points.
Disregard.
Yeah, we throw the whole thing at it first,
Uh-huh.
and then we're done.
Okay.
Because we don't want to have that loading. Yeah. So we throw it all.
Okay.
We throw it all at the renderer.
Okay. So I think that it's basically, it should return you a promise representing completion or failure of the whole transaction. I think that would be just a lot easier to deal with. So you say speak, and then you get back a promise that you can say when this thing has completed, when it has failed. You can kind of chain them together. You can do lots of interesting things with a standard design aspect of the platform promises. It seems like they should be immutable, but they're not, and that's wonky. I actually found myself thinking a lot more in terms of speakers than utterances. Like, you have all these utterances, and they all have their own independent properties of voice, pitch, rate. I found that I have to set the same things all the time, depending on who I want to speak. Like, I don't want an infinite variety, right? I want to have kind of more like script, right? So for me, I thought about it more as like a speaker abstraction. So this is not standards. This is just sort of what I did. And I think it helps with all these issues. But it's exactly poke holes in it. That's the purpose, right? And we should talk about what the problems are. And the idea of chapters is for us to have this discussion and then try to take that feedback back into standards and make sure that they get it, right, from a whole bunch of people. Ideally, we'll have some initial feedback, and then you all can go home and play with this for a month, and then you can like write to me or come back, share, and then tell me, like, after I played with it a while, I threw up, and then, or it was really great. One of the bugs that we missed is length. So the utterance thing, actually, you can screw it up by just giving it really long text. If you give it if the text is too long, it will just cut off the text. You won't get your events and things like that. So that's kind of terrible. So
what kind of ceiling is that? Is that like 2 or 3 minutes of speech?
no, it's like 64 characters. It's pretty low. Yeah, it's not very high. So this is my API, so don't confuse it with standards, right? This is just like a shell, like jQuery is a library. This is just a simple library that I wrote for myself so that I can make sense of the world with speech. But I think that it works better and is a little bit more intuitive and papers over the problems, right? So this can speak like actually pretty long text, I hope.
So you're just.
I think this is a remote.
Like 64 at a time.
No, because that would be weird because you would break in the middle of. All of my sounds on all of the things seem to have stopped working.
But
Did
you
it
are
pause somewhere?
chunking it, right?
Well, is your cue jacked up?
That is a good question, actually. That's
Someone's paying attention.
that's right. You want a sticker? I have stickers.
Yeah.
So, a question. How close is this to being implemented into websites that need to have ADA compliance?
Oh, that's a good question. So, in large part, it's not because it really. Let me just find this button to unjack my audio.
Normalcy should be restored.
Let's see if that actually makes a difference. No,
Great.
you're gonna hate me.
Basic
Ah.
voice speakers.
We're getting a problem there. I wonder if it's just. I promise I will answer your question.
To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing
I
end
see.
them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by asleep, to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to? 'Tis a consummation, devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub.
So you're watching the console, I take it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Setting up promises.
Yeah. So what it's doing there is it's basically chunking that, and it's using not a very smart thing. Basically, it's saying, look, there's certain kinds of punctuation that make for a natural breathing point. You look for sort of like the closest one to that is kind of near the limit.
64,
Yeah. So it's not super smart, but it seems to work pretty well. Sorry, I don't want to miss your question. So it's about accessibility, right?
Yeah, because I thought that it would be a cool way to be able to pitch to a client, hey, I can also add speech to text if you need ADA compliance.
Yeah. So ADA compliance really has to do with making it accessible to a screen reader. I mean, that's not the only thing, but in terms of something reading you the speech, it really is about making it accessible to a screen reader like NVDA or JAWS or VoiceOver or Chromevox. There's a number of them. And that's all about how you write your HTML. So this is actually like a separate thing. And because we're just very early in this, I think the chances are that you would probably make that worse if you just tried to do it yourself. You know what I mean? But there are like interesting examples that I have seen that aren't that. So I did see one where somebody was made a button that you would click to read you the text. And it may be preferable to have a script that can read it to you if you can choose a voice and a pitch and a volume and things like that, if you want it to be read natural. But most people I know who use screen readers, they're, here I'm gonna,
And this performs the same way in Firefox with the Firefox. In Firefox with the flag set. Right.
I don't think that the text-to-speech is just out there in the wild. You don't need a set of flag, as far as I can tell.
It was the recognition that you needed.
Yeah, the recognition you do. Which I think is actually really cool and a little bit more problematic, actually. So I hope y'all want to come back and
we don't even fight with that.
Who can remember what the range is for the rate?
This is like 1 to 2.
Okay. Oh yeah, should make it say something.
Hello there, everybody.
No, it's to 10 actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, rate is to 10, not
Yeah,
volume.
exactly.
Yes.
I should have put that in. Did you catch that? This is how I feel. This is how I feel sitting next to somebody using a screen reader. Like it, you get really adept at using your eyes. They get really adept at using their ears. And so, what would be a comfortable tone for you and I would seem painfully slow to most of them. I think there are times when you want it either way, and like having a feature where you could read it at a normal rate would, I think, be kind of helpful for everybody. It would be a good thing. Maybe you want to listen to it in the car. That's pretty cool. Or, maybe they want to experience it a little bit more in terms of enjoyment, like with a book on tape. Yeah, on tape. You can tell my birthday really is 1974. At least I can say a book on record.
Those are trending now. It's fine.
Yeah, so I think that's the short answer, is that we haven't figured that out yet, and I don't think that there's a strong case that you could make without some more data that this would necessarily by itself be a good thing. It could, in fact, make it worse if you're not careful. Make sense? Okay. I told you I think about mine more like a speaker. So rather than create these independent utterances and set the properties on all the things, I just create a speaker and then I can reuse it.
Greetings, Professor Vulcan. Would you like to play a game?
So that's from War Games, which is the movie from 1983, I think, that made me want to play with computers.
War game? Oh yeah. War.
Yeah. Yeah, if you haven't seen that movie, I know it's super old, but you have to see it.
Remember the Cold War?
So then voices, like all the crap with loading and finding voices and the race conditions and everything, I do, just like I said, I have a function that you can call that will get called just before it's spoken so that you can find what voices are available right then. So basically what this does is this creates a queue and it says, hell with your queue is confusing. We'll just do our own queue, and this way we'll manage when we send it exactly one thing at a time, right? And this way when something enters the queue, we just figured out what voice to use. Here, we had that race condition where if I tried to run it, we wouldn't get the voices unless I did some crazy gymnastics and stood on my head and waved a chicken bone and But here,
Game, the only winning move is not to play. How about a nice game of chess?
so here I can just give it a really simple function to get called, and it can say, just when you're ready to speak, you test and find this if it's available. But for Westworth, I had really the same observation as you, which was like, I can't connect to a server, like I can't connect to a different server and get the voice I want. I don't know what's in the set you're going to give me. So what I really want is like, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. And I found that basically the only two properties that I can even hope to make sense of is the URI or the name. So I just created this filter array that you can use instead of writing a function, where you just say, I want to test the name against Vox, or then if you can't find that, Noids, and if you can't find that, NUS. As long as it has NUS, it's probably okay. So
DOD pension files indicate current mailing as Dr. Robert U. A.K.A. Stephen W. Vulcan, 5 Tall Cedar Road, Goose Island, Oregon 97.
it's just funny, the title of my last one was Greetings, Professor Vulcan from Wargames, and I purposely, in my demo, misspelled Falcon. No, I don't know if you caught that there, but he didn't say Falcon. So that's an interesting thing, is it, like, without something like voice XML or SSML or something like that, it's not bulletproof. You're up to whatever they're going to read, and if it's a name or something they don't know how to pronounce it, they could really butcher it. And in the case of Falcon, it might not sound like you want. My calls to say return a promise, like I said. I just think that that's a lot simpler, so that I can, for the most part, not reason about it, not worry about it. So I maintain a queue, just like I said, and you can just throw things into the queue and they won't stomp on one another. But if you need to do some synchronization, if you need to know, well, when are these things done speaking, then you can do that too. So you see here, I created a voice that's just an English person. I don't care, male, female, whatever. And then I'm trying to emulate sort of those things you had in like French class or Italian class or Spanish class. That would be like a record. You guys have that?
I did. Does that make you
All right, that does make me feel a little better. They would put it on in the class, and it would be like some conversation. It would really contrived conversation. Their record player is broken, all kinds of things that you'll never ever need to say. But they're almost always between like a man and a woman, right? So I wanted to pick a male voice and a female voice, and I wanted it to be an Italian speaker, if possible, because that's just going to make it a whole lot more believable. But if not, I wanted to just at least keep it to this one Victoria that I liked, and Vicky is the other one, on different systems. One's on, I think, Android, and the other is on Chrome, something like that. And then if not, just if the name contains female, then it's probably going to be female. And if it doesn't match any of those, it's still going to use the default voice, so it's not like you won't get any sound. But here I can have a conversation, and I can, like, I find this actually way more readable than create an utterance and then set these properties and then find the voices and then send that to speak. It's just a lot more intuitive to me to create a speaker, tell you exactly how to find the voice you want, and to say, you're just going to say these things. And when all those promises are complete, then you're going to put this output here that says all done speaking. So
how do you say good evening in Italian?
We say buonasera.
Buonasera?
No, buonasera. Try again.
Buonasera?
Sì, molto bene. Very good.
Yay. So then you see down here it says all done speaking. I find that just like a lot more, you say what you want to happen and a lot less about how you want it to happen, and you give it sort of the right piece of information at the right times. I don't know, what do y'all think about that? You want to like side by side one of the examples? I think
I think that for your application, this syntax works far better.
Okay.
I think there are some applications where the other syntax is cleaner.
Can you give me an example?
If I want to just say alert, alert, close the computer, like I can define that all in one place.
I can. Yeah. So, new voice speakers say some text versus.
Yeah, you're right.
Speak
You're right.
since it's like exactly the same number of things.
You're right.
Okay. But good though. Call bullshit on me if I'm wrong, because that. Yeah. So this is kind of just like bottom up what I'm using, and probably if you give me another month or two, I'll continue to tweak it and find things that I, find less than perfect or whatever. But you are all welcome to use it. There should be a link in here. And you're welcome to not use it too, and like compare and contrast, and then give me your feedback. Has anybody actually use this? Did anybody like read my blogs before they came in and they're like, I'm gonna know all this stuff cold. I'm gonna no? Okay. Cool. Yeah. So, any thoughts, questions? Yeah. Go.
So like in VXML, there are like emphasis and all of that stuff.
Yeah, those are the guys I asked right there.
Yeah.
He works with us.
Oh, you do? Okay. You came in late when I was talking to them, so I didn't know that. Yeah.
What I was gonna say is there any like practical way to implement those like
yourself?
Nation cues ourselves. Okay.
No, you're asking like ourselves.
Yeah.
Would it be possible using this to write something that could speak voice XML?
Well, to implement like the actual intonation tags in voice XML, like emphasis and stuff.
So I don't know enough about like what those mean in terms of how we could take that out.
Yeah.
But I expect you probably could, but it would also be like a little bit of guessy work. So
I see.
Like it is really good at understanding things like exclamation points and things like that. So you probably could like chunk it, modify the pitch rate and volume yourself for the different things. So you could
really
maybe
need to hack to get like that Faulkner to say it correctly.
Yeah.
You would phonetically spell it out. Yeah.
Yeah. All I did was add a U to Faulkner. It's not in the movie. It's Falkner. I just added a U. And you'll see that here as well. So I have an English speaker and a Italian speaker, and the Italian speaker says buonasera, and the English speaker, they don't know how to say that, right? So I have to make them say it wrong. So I just phonetically spell out something that is an approximation of saying that.
What's interesting is that any actual native speaker would also just try to sound stuff out if they couldn't ask someone how something was pronounced, like on the radio. But we have a built-in profanity filter in our minds.
Yeah,
I wonder
exactly.
if any of these voices have that.
Actually, they do seem to, because one of my pet projects deals with like a script, and in my script I had an explicitive, and it seems purposeful. It like mispronounced the explicitive, which is only 4 letters, starts with an H, with an S, and ends with a T, and it's hard to mispronounce. But strangely though, the UK speaker doesn't mispronounce it if you put an E on the end. So I don't know, maybe it's like less taboo or something. But yeah, but that's an interesting thought. Do you? No, behind you there. I thought you were looking like you. No. Yeah.
You got one that I think you covered, but maybe there's some
online
nuance to it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
It's from John Neal.
Oh, okay.
He said, "Awesome, Brian.
Hey, John.
Did you find a library you thought did a good job patching and normalizing cross-browser API, even if by abstracting it?"
Yeah. So so there's two ends of this. There's the speaking and the listening, and because I need to kind of deal with both, I wound up just sort of writing my own. There is a I can't think of it right now off the top of my head, but there is one for like normalizing it, and it seemed to do a kind of a good job, but I didn't find its API to be just like knockout better than the other one, and also it seemed like it was kind of trying to normalize like before a lot of people had implemented it, and now it's sort of like, you know, we have hills and valleys, not like chasms and canyons. So I chose to just not use the one that I found. I wish I could think of the name of it, because whoever wrote that deserves some props. Just, you know, Google it and you'll find there's a couple of libraries. Yeah. I don't know, was he on the Code and Spy chat or Twitter or?
He tweeted that at the account.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, hopefully that answers his question. Anything else, or?
You mentioned that you try to, you haven't really gotten a handle on this, how it would work with streaming. What have you looked at? Like how have you approached that, if you've started to at all?
So there's two things. One is when we're talking about the standard, obviously, like the standard, we can make changes, so we can introduce that into the standard, right? The standard really should, I feel very strongly, should explain itself in terms of the existing features of the platform. So it should have fetch and streams and promises and how it integrates with web audio. It doesn't explain any of those things. So I think if it did explain any of those things, then we could jack right in and do it. And if we want to handle it ourselves, to like put it in a library, then we need something like you use a third party, right? You
Yes,
use a
we
third
do.
party. We need to set up something where you can do it. So strangely, Google Cloud Platform offers where you can send it like text, and it. Do you know something about this?
Yeah, Google Cloud Platform
'Cause,
offers speech
like-
synthesis from text.
Yeah, because like you're.
It's the
So
same
it's
engine.
rated though, right? So this is what I was going to say. So if you use it through
Well,
the
it's not
browser,
free.
so if you use it through the browser, it's just like you could just use it and use it and use it, right? But if your browser calls the Google Cloud Platform not natively, you call it from your website, it does seem to charge you, which
Oh yeah, it's not a free. That's not a free API.
seems like why, if it's in the platform. I mean,
Because
their
it's
their
not,
choice,
It's
but
not a. It's two reasons. Number one, it's not a free action, and number two, people will pay for it.
I think it's mostly number two, right? Because
Well, but it is. I mean, it's not without cost to them, even though that cost is insignificant.
right, but when I type this in and I send it and I use remote voice, I can do that and do it and do it and do it, and I never get a bill for it, right? So it's using the same services. And I was just saying, curiously, they also have it available, so we could do what you're saying. We could fake it. We could send a fetch directly to Google Cloud Platform and like make your API think that it's this API and make it a hella smarter. We could get back. Does that give you back like a MP3 or like what does it give you back? You know?
Usually, it just gives you back a stream, like a website.
Yeah, it gives you back. It gives you back a stream, but the object that it gives you back is actually this. We didn't look at that, but next time we'll look at that next time. It's actually an object that has this very weird thing where you get back an outer object, and then that object contains something like an array, but not an array of objects, which contains, each of those contains something like an array, but not an array. But by default, it's always one element in each collection. Very screwy. That's why I didn't want to get into that this time, but next time if you want. So that would be possibly an option, but you would eventually receive a bill. I think that they do have like up to this much is free.
I have the impression it's fairly substantial as well. The amount that you can
Yeah, actually, we looked at, because I hated this idea that I can't choose the speaker for my project, right? Because like it has speakers like actual like characters in movies, you know, like that, and like I will put it on in my car, and especially because that shared synthesizer thing, like I had been looking at a demo and chosen a Japanese voice, and then I went to play my game and it didn't pick up the default speaker, and my whole entire game was in this Japanese voice and I couldn't change it. And I'm like, wow, I think that's just so hit and miss. I really want to be able to say, no, this is a older male voice that, you know, like I want to be pretty specific about it. He has a Scottish accent. Yeah. Like he has to have a Scottish accent. He must. I want to be able to do that, but I can't. So I did look into, there are a number of services actually, surprising, like how many. But some of them were like, I mean, actual cents a minute. Like, I mean, it was like a 900 number or something, right? Like it was really crazy.
Well, it's easier and easier to make voices these days. I mean, you just need enough speech where you can get all the data from.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to do on demand still, but especially for Google, I think that they're pretty good at it, or they wouldn't be. Firefox Mozilla is also working on an open one, right? They just started that about a month ago. That will be pretty neat. You can actually go contribute to that. I should have brought a link, but just Google it. Maybe I'll tweet it after. That's pretty interesting. You can go and actually record your voice. They'll give you things to read, and you read them, and they add them to their database, and they assign the voices, and go look them up and normalize them and do all the. It's pretty complicated. Yeah. Maybe.
You may have answered this earlier. So this API, this is text-to-speech running on the browser side. This isn't going back to a service, or is it going back to the
Okay,
service you're talking about?
Okay, so it can do either.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to disastrously turn my Wi-Fi completely off, and then we'll see.
How do you say good evening in Italian? We say buonasera.
So that Italian voice is remote.
No, buonasera. Try again. Buonasera. Si.
Yeah.
Molto bene. Very good.
Yeah. So does that answer your question? Like it can be either, and the voices actually tell you in their thing whether they're remote or local. So you can say like, hey, I prefer local because like I can't afford the charges, or you know.
Or you can't afford the inconsistency.
Or you can say I'm willing to pay for the remote because I can't afford the inconsistency, right? So.
But you could query the voice when you're setting it. And
That's
say,
right.
And say like, don't even play this section if I can't get this voice because it's not going to be.
You could, but there's just like way too many variables for me to do it. Like I just can't even imagine trying to make my thing with like, it could be any voice and they could be any like, yeah. And I mean, because there's subtleties there, like, you know, this one is, you heard the difference in pronunciation when you try to say Italian words as an English speaker, right? You can take the same thing and put an Australian speaker in there and get even different kinds of things, right? And some of them can get actually quite confusing. So you really, like, I sort of wish that there was at least some really basic, I think, so there's a lot of competing things for this, but I think voice XML is one of the ones that Yeah, so here's SSML, and SSML has like some really basic things like you can choose like a gender or like a basic speed, or like there's just some really basic like almost selectors for saying it's kind of roughly what I want. You know, there's no way to do that with just the names and things as far as I know, like unless somebody maintains and downloads like an entire database of all the supported names and all of that, which I guess is possible. Yeah. But can you do that in voice XML too? Can you choose the voice and
Yeah.
Can you choose it based on like all different sorts of attributes?
Yeah, whatever you
Yeah.
want to do at any given time. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't really do that. Like there's no way. Like you saw in my example, I wanted a male and a female voice, like, and you know, the Italian voice, I didn't like if I just put an Italian voice on my computer, it's going to be a female Italian voice. That's just the default remote service for Italian is female. I didn't choose that. It just, that's how it is, right? It could just as easily have been male, and like if that matters to you, there's unfortunately no way to like select and things like that to say, you know, like you just don't know. There's not enough information, not enough meta information in the voice to let you know how to pick the qualities that you want. So you can set the language, which is really good, actually. I mean, being able to set the language is pretty key. But there's no way to know other attributes. Like, there are a lot of voices that sound like they're novelty voices, right? They're like, it's a voice that's made of bells, or a voice that's made of barking dogs, or, right? And those are cool, but I definitely don't want one of those to show up if I'm like, oh, I'm making this thing to teach kindergartners how, you know, and it's like, let me tell you how to pronounce whatever, and it's like, ruff, ruff, ruff. That would be kind of disastrous. I didn't factor in the idea that I would have to retype the password when I secret password. Yeah.
So what would some of the other, like,
1107.
Oh, good call.
What would
Thanks.
some of the other use cases?
That's actually
be,
why I made it visible.
Like on the web. So you said, I remember you mentioned before, like for articles or something, or other, you know, accessibility things. Like, what other web uses would this be? Would this be good for?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? That's, you know, one of the things that is part of the thing about like the extensible web manifesto is give people these low level powers and see what they do, because we don't know and we're usually wrong. But we had like a long time we wanted to be able to take things offline, to be able to, like, you can go to my website and still do certain things offline. Like, once you've been there once, you can have that experience offline and still maybe not do everything, but like come back and read the article that you were just reading or something. And so it took a while, and we got this specification for app cache, and that was terrible. Basically, I think there's like one real consumer of it in the whole world, because it didn't do what we needed to do, and it's this very, very high level thing. There's no way to kind of poke in and say, just this, just do this, right? So that's why I say, like, we have a lot of raw materials. So now it's up to a whole bunch of people to go experiment and say, here's this crazy thing I did that is really good at teaching kindergartners words, or preschoolers. Here's the thing that teaches you French, or here's who knows? I don't know. Here's the thing that reads articles. Here's the thing that makes phone calls. I don't know.
I like your input. I have two contexts in mind. One is a personal IoT project, right? So
okay.
on the browser facing side, being able to give specific audio alerts, you know, the stove is on, but it ought to be off.
Sure, yeah.
Lights are still on. This can do, right?
Yep, yep, definitely.
So that's one context I'll use it in. The other, in terms of, say, testing of voice XML app on IVR platform,
Yeah.
Having to call in to tests all the time is a drain, right? And so, really, I'm interested in like, are you able to change the voices you have locally? Just as side questions.
So I know on Android you can peek into the device and actually like download new ones. I'm sure you can, but I don't know how on the other devices.
Well, didn't you say earlier that it didn't work on the Android browser anyway?
No.
It works on the Android Chrome.
No. A whole bunch of Android Chrome works. So pause, resume. Like there are particular aspects that don't work. Like
It's just the
uniformly.
Android browser itself. Any other browser that's on an Android device will probably most likely work.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Chrome, yes.
So, like, give me an example, like Firefox?
Yeah, like Firefox or Chrome or Opera that you can download on an Android device.
Yeah.
Or wait,
so Opera basically is Chrome. Brave is Chrome. Do y'all know Brave? So, anybody want stickers? They have a really cool logo. So they're another Chromium-based browser. They have a kind of an interesting concept. Check them out. But I'll leave these up on the table, and if anybody wants them, you can grab some. If any of my friends from Brave are listening, I just gave away your stickers. Yeah, so any Chromium-based browser should work. It works on WebKit on iOS, and there all of the browsers are actually WebKit. So you can get Chrome for iOS, you can get Firefox for iOS, but they're really WebKit, like the engine and everything. So I expect that they would work just fine. I'm sure that there's some like off-brand browser on Android that wouldn't. I don't know. But you saw the can I use, right? It's around 80% of the deployed base, and the deployed base still includes IE11, which is pretty heavy in corporate use still, and it still includes the stock Android browser that before it started shipping with Chrome. So by the time you factor those out, it's pretty much everybody implements that. Yeah. Yeah, so unfortunately, none of them respect voice XML, or you can try it. Maybe voice XML is like the one I didn't try, but I tried a number of ones based on like the, who, depending on who was writing the thing or who was proposing the thing. It's like, should it be SSML? Should it be voice XML? Should it be, what's the one for Java? Does anybody know?
XML, you just said.
SSML? Yeah. Do you know what the Java one is? Sounded like maybe, or there's a specification for Java speech, and some of them claim that you should be able to use that. Didn't work for me.
The trouble that we have with voice XML is we're using third-party parser,
Mhm.
and our third-party parser sometimes doesn't follow the standard exactly.
Yeah.
They have extra tags. Like yeah.
So one thing I thought of, this is kind of cheesy, but one thing that I thought of is just setting up a machine in my house with Chrome in a quiet spot, and then like sending things to that server, right? Having that server send to my Chrome, to my V8, hey, do this speech with this API, and then capture that with web audio and send it back to my server so that I can do get it as a stream, right? That's pretty circuitous, but it's free. Whole web is pretty circuitous, so yeah, I don't know. I feel like we've gotten pretty long. I don't want to keep anybody here, so I'll stick around if anybody wants to talk or ask questions, but I feel like probably for the sake of most people, we should say goodnight.
Good night, everybody.
All right.